Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chav Beis, Daf 22 of Masechta Ayruvin. Chav, it's a good daf. What do you want me to tell you? Starts off with the continuation of the Agadatas from yesterday. So I'm kind of into that. And then we get back to kind of Ayruvin-y kind of things, but nothing too crazy. We discuss maximum size for Pasei Beiros, which have kind of been coming up. And Reshus hayachid with Reshus harabim passing through. That came up the other day as well. So we're going to see the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim over there. It's arguably interesting. Let us begin at the Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, all the 2 lines from the bottom. Kvutzos of Taltalim, the pasuk in Shir Hashirim says that his hair is like wavy, curly, very nice, and shechorot ka'orev, and black like a raven. Says the Gemara, Kvutzos of Taltalim, his hair is like wavy and stuff. Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Mar Ukva. So Rav Chizda said the name of Mar Ukva. You guys remember Mar Ukva? He was like the Av Bezdin during the time of Shmuel. It teaches that on every single a quote's like a thorn, but I guess on it's like teaching about every drop of each letter. You can learn piles and piles of halachas. So there's a lot to learn. It's almost like infinite, like never-ending amounts of stuff to learn in the Torah. Shchoros ka'orev, they are black like a raven. B'mi'at hamotzan. Who do you find all these piles and piles of Torah? B'mi shemashkim umayriv alein leveis hamedrash. For somebody who wakes up early and stays up late studying Torah. So that is how you will find all this Torah, by a fellow like that, right? And he learns that from shchorot ka'orev. It's like shacharit ve'arvit, morning and evening. Rabba amar b'mi shemashkir panav alein ka'orev. Rabbah says it means that you find Divrei Torah for somebody who blackens his face like the black face of a raven. I don't know what that means. What? Like he doesn't shower and stuff? And I don't know. I guess he just studies hard. Rava Amar, Rava Atgizak, B'misha Mesim Atzmo Achzari Albanav Beneveso Ka'arev. Says Rava that you'll find Divrei Torah for somebody who makes himself like evil, mean, like a, what's it called? Like a, I don't know. Somebody who's like, not very nice, very authoritative. I can't remember the word, but somebody who's like, not very nice to his family about it. And Rashi points out like a raven, I guess, kind of ignores his children and has them fend for themselves. But if you want to succeed in Torah, that's what you got to do, says Rava. Kihadar of Adabar Masna, like Rav Adabar Masna, have a cause of Levei Rav, he would go to study. Amr le Dvisu, and his wife said to him, Yanuke didach, my avidlu. How am I supposed to support these children of yours if you're just going to go out and study Torah all day? Amr la mishlimu korma ba'agma. He said, what? Is there no longer any wild vegetables that you can go forage by the swamp? Go forage wild vegetables at the swamp. I'm going to study Torah. Okay. Very nice. Let's go weiter, friends. Umishalim the son of Alpanav la'avido. So the pasuk says that if you have a nudnik, so then the Eibishter is going to get him in big trouble. So what does it mean? Umishalim the son of Alpanav la'avido. How do you understand this pasuk that he pays back to his haters to terminate them? So Amr Yeshua ben Levi, says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Ilmulei mikrakazu b'efshar la'omer. If not for the fact that we have a pasuk that says this, we would be unable to say such an extreme thing about somebody's relationship with God, which is kaviyachol ka'adam shonosei masui al panav. It's like you have a person who is carrying a heavy burden on his face. That sounds very, very uncomfortable. Mevakesh la'ashlicha mimenu, and obviously he then wants to throw this burden off of his face. Right, so this is a reference to somebody who views his relationship with God so unfavorably that it's as if he has something very, very heavy on his face that all he wants to do is remove it. Lo ya'acher l'sono, and then the Eibishter will not delay in hating this fellow back. Oy vavoy. Amar Rab Ila Lisonav hu delo ya'acher aval ya'acher tzadikim gmurim. So the Eibishter doesn't pay back. So the Eibishter pays back to these haters, immediately. Lo ya'acher, he will not delay. However, for tzadikim, their reward comes in the future in Olam Haba. V'anu damar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Here's what Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says. What does the pasuk say? Right, it's actually the pasuk right next to it, immediately following it in the Torah. Asher nochim tzavach hayom la'asosam, that I command you today to do them. Hayom la'asosam v'lo l'machal la'asosam. Do them today. Don't do them tomorrow. Hayom la'asosam l'machal l'chabas chaim. Do them today, and you will collect the reward later on in the future. Wow. Rab Chagai v'itema Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani may tichsiv erech apayim erech af mi bailei. So Reb Chagai, and some say it's Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, said, what does the pasuk mean when it says erech apayim? That the Eibishter kind of takes a long time with his, displeasure, but apayim is plural. Erech af mi bailei. It should say erech af, only for the Rishayim, right? He only gets angry at the evildoers, right? So, no, I'm sorry. I guess it should be really for the tzadikim. Kilu erech apayim, that he is long and patient on his anger. So erech apayim tzadikim, erech apayim l'Rishayim. No, that he's patient both for the tzadikim as well as for the Rishayim. I guess unlike the previous explanation where the Eibishter is lo ya'acher, he will immediately punish those nudniks. But this drush is saying that no, the Eibishter also has patience for the nudniks. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad beis asayim v'chulei. So Rabbi Yehuda had said in our Mishnah that the maximum size of a pasei beros is a beis asayim, 2 sa'as worth. Now I had confused myself a little bit. I think beis asayim is, well, a beis sa'a, 1 sa'a is 2,500 square amos. I was thinking like 2,500 times 2,500, which is really quite large. But no, it's actually my mistake. It's 50 amos by 50 amos, which is then 2,500 square amos, like an area of 2,500 amos. But it's basically 50 amos by 50 amos. So now beis asayim would be twice that. So we're actually going to see machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon. No, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, about if this is ke'ilu, like an area of 100 amos by 50 amos. Ke'ilu, if you take 150 area, right, 50 by 50 space, and then attach another one to it. So essentially you have one area that is 100 amos by 50 amos. Or are we talking about one area that is 70 and 2/3 amos by 70 and 2/3 amos, i.e. is it square or is it rectangular? What do you guys think? Friends, let's move on. So they want to know, bor ufasin kamar or dilma bor vilo pasin kamar. They want to know that when Rabbi Yehuda says that the maximum size for a pasei beros is a beis asayim, is that saying that the bore itself, the watering hole itself, can be the size of a beis asayim, and then the pasei beros is in addition to that, is external to that? Or do we say that the entire area, the gross area, must be a beis asayim, including the bore, including the area outside in the pasei beros, that is all a maximum of beis asayim? So that's the question. Is it just the bore itself that, is limited to a beis asayim? You can have the pasei beros outside of that in addition to the beis asayim? Or is the pasei beros included in this maximum of beis asayim? That is what the Gemara wants to know. Ibailu, they ask a kasha. I'm going to read that again. Bor ufasin kamar. Are they saying that the maximum size, according to Rabbi Yehuda, of a beis asayim includes the bore as well as the pasei beros? Or dilma bor velo pasin kamar. Or maybe just the bore has a maximum size of beis asayim, and then you can construct the pasei beros around that. What's the difference in perspective? Well, do we say Adam Nosein Einav Biboro, that what the person is really paying attention to is the bore, is the watering hole itself? V'lo gazrinan dilma asi litaltule yosem beis asayim b'karp of the alma, and we're not concerned that he's going to be looking at the area outside of the pit, i.e. the pasei beros, and say, well, this, when we take into account not just the pit, but also, right, the bore, but also the Pasei Beiraos, it's actually larger than a Beis Sa'asayim, and say, oh, well, I guess then maybe in a Karpaf, which is an unresidential space, which is limited by a Beis Sa'asayim, well, he might come to the mistaken conclusion that, well, since my Pasei Beiraos are larger than a Beis Sa'asayim, because just the bore itself is the Beis Sa'asayim, but then the Pasei Beiraos is constructed outside of that, right? So then he might say, oh, well, I guess a Karpaf also could be larger than a Beis Sa'asayim. So are we concerned about, is he going to look at the area outside of the pit or just the pit itself? So let's read it. So let's read that again. Right. So do we say that, right, V'lo gazrinon asu l'tiltule yosem Beis Sa'asayim b'karpav da'alma? Do we say that all he looks at is the pit itself, and therefore the pit itself, the bore itself, could be a Beis Sa'asayim, and we're not concerned that he's going to look outside of that and then draw the mistaken conclusion that a karpaf could be larger than a Beis Sa'asayim? Or Dilma, or maybe Adam nosein einav b'mechitzaso. No, or maybe we actually say that what the person is looking at is the walls, in this case the Pasei Beiraos, and therefore and therefore we're concerned that if we allow the Pasei Beiraos to be in addition to the Beis Sa'asayim of the bore, well then he might end up making a karpaf that is larger than a Beis Sa'asayim. So chevre, that is the question that we're trying to answer. Rabbi Yehuda's maximum size of a Beis Sa'asayim is that for the pit, for the bore, but the Pasei Beiraos can be built outside of that and even larger than a Beis Sa'asayim, or is the maximum size of a Beis Sa'asayim including the Pasei Beiraos? Tashma, come in here. Kamein Mikoravin. What is the minimum size of a Pasei Beiraos? Kidei Rosh of Ruba Shalpara, large enough that the head and most of the body of a cow can get in there to drink. And we've seen this brisa before. V'chamein Mu'uchakin. What is the maximum size of a Pasei Beiraos? Afilu Kora, Afilu Koraim. So it can be really quite large. One core is 30 sa'ah, so that's 15 times a Beis Sa'asayim. And then he says even 2 core, which is, even larger than that. So, twice that. So, basically very large, according to the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Beis Sa'asayim mutar yosem Beis Sa'asayim aser. Rabbi Yehuda says there is a maximum of a Beis Sa'asayim in terms of the larger extreme of how large a Pasei Beiraos can be. Amrullah Rabbi Yehuda, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, Yata Mode, Badir V'Sar, Muktzah V'Chatzar, Afilu Beis Chameshes Karim, Uveis Asaris Karim Shemuter. So the Chacham said to Rabbi Yehuda, they said, Rabbi Yehuda, don't you admit that when it comes to a deer and a sahar, which were these area for sheep, that's also residential because the shepherd will sleep there, Muktzah V'Chatzar, a backyard and a front yard, right? These are residential spaces. These are Reshus hayachids, and they can be however large you want them to be. Afilu beis chameshes korim uveis aseres korim. They could be 5 core, 10 core. These are very large spaces. Shemuter, right? Because as long as it's a residential space and it's a Reshus hayachid, it could be larger than a beis sa'asayim. However, if it's a non-residential space, then there's a cap of a beis sa'asayim. So what the Chacham are saying to Rabbi Yehuda, they're saying, why are you capping the Pasei Beiraos at a beis sa'asayim? You must admit that by residential spaces, they can be larger than a Beis Sa'asayim, and this is a residential space, as we've seen in the past. Rashi explained, because it's for drinking. Drinking is a residential thing. Amar Lahem, Rabbi Yehuda said to them, Zo mechitza ve'elu pasen. So his response was, yeah, but when it comes to my front yard and my backyard, so I have proper walls over there. Over here, we're just talking about Pasei Beiraos, which is not a proper wall, and therefore it will be limited to a Beis Sa'asayim. Fine. Now, Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, bor Beis Sa'asayim, a Beis Sa'asayim muter. That says Reb Shimon ben Elazar that a bor that is a Beis Sa'asayim by a Beis Sa'asayim, it's square, and it's 70. So that would essentially be 70 2/3 amos by 70 2/3 amos would equal 5,000 square amos, which is a Beis Sa'asayim. So he says that if the bore itself, you hear that, friends? That according to Shimon ben Elazar, if the bore itself is a Beis Sa'asayim, so then it's mutter, i.e., So it can't be larger than that, but that also means that the Pasei Beiros are in addition to that. So and I guess Rav Shimon ben Elazar is saying that, the minimum amount of oh, is that what he's saying? Oh, then maybe he's saying that kilo, and then outside of the pit, you can only have an area the size of Rosh Veruba of the para, I guess. Okay, it's not as important right, because in the ratio, the Tanna Kama was saying, Kamim Mikoravim, what's the minimum size? That's Rosh Veruba. It could be that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is saying is that then, if you have a pit that is already a Beis Ha'asayim, so then the Pasei Beiros, which is in addition to that, would only be allowed to be Rosh Veruba Shel Para. Okay, fine. But nonetheless, what's the point for us? The point for us is that according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, when we say Beis Ha'asayim, it's only the pit and the Pasei Beiros are in addition to that. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar bor v'lo pasin, from the fact that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that the maximum of Beis Ha'asayim is only the pit, so Michlal de Rabbi Yehuda bor ufasin kamar. So if Rabbi Yehuda is arguing with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, then his opinion must be that the maximum size of a Pasei Beiros includes the Pasei Beiros, which means that the bor is going to have to be less than Beis Ha'asayim. Vilohi, the Gemara says, no, it's not true. Rabbi Yehuda bor v'lo pasin kamar. No, Rabbi Yehuda is actually saying that the maximum of Beis Ha'asayim is just the bor. You can build the Pasei Beiros in addition to the bor. Yachi, if that's the case, Hanad Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. But then he's saying the same thing as Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, which is that the maximum of a Beis Ha'asayim is just the bor. The Pasei Beiros are in addition to that. So Yikebenayu Arich v'Katan. So the nafkamina is, does the Beis Ha'asayim have to be exact? Does it have to be square? According to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he says yes, it would have to be square. Right? What did he say? He said, right, bor Beis Ha'asayim a Beis Ha'asayim. Right, that it has to be the same. All sides have to be the same, which would be 70 and 2/3 amas. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda would say no, it just has to have a maximum. The board just has to have a maximum area of Beis Ha'asayim, which is 5,000 square amas. However, they could be rectangular; they don't have to be square. Okay, fine. But both Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda would agree that the Beis Ha'asayim is referring to just the bor. The Pasei Beiros would be in addition to that. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said a general rule called Aver Shetashmishu L'Dira. Whenever you have a space that is for inhabiting, that is residential, Kigon Dir V'Sar Muktzeh V'Chatzer, such as these places for the sheep where the shepherd sleeps, as well as a front yard, a backyard. So afilu beis chameshes korim ubeis aseres korim. So even if it was 5 kor or 10 kor, these very large areas, it would be considered Reshus hayachid. It's no problem. So mutter. V'chodir shetashmish la'avir kagon borginin shebisados beis ha'asayim mutter yosem beis ha'asayim also, as we saw the other day. However, something that it's tashmishes la'avir, that you build this Reshus hayachid, but only to kind of spare you from the elements, right? If you're this guard of the fields and it's very hot outside, so you build this space just so that you can stay out of the sun, but not because, as Rashi says, right, the diras adam l'chnisav litzia tamid, to go in and out all the time, this is where the person lives. But these borginin, they're really just when it's too hot, you go in there to get out of the sun, but it's not really a residential space. So then you would have a maximum of a Beis Ha'asayim for that space. New Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Imaya derech Reshus harabim mafsaktan yisalkena l'tzadin v'chacham omrim eino tzarich. We've seen this brisa before. We saw it. When did we see it, friends? Was it 2 days ago, Lamaisa? I think so. Why not? Yeah, 2 days ago on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. So Rabbi Yehuda says that if you have these Pasei Beiros and you have Reshus harabim passing through the Pasei Beiros, so what you should do is you should divert the Reshus harabim so that it goes around the Pasei Beiros, because if the Reshus harabim passes through the Pasei Beiros, it will no longer be a Reshus hayachid. Whereas the Chachamim say, Eino tzarich, it's no problem. You can have the Reshus harabim pass through the Pasei Beiros, and it still remains a Reshus hayachid. You could still use it, take water out of the well, into the Pas Beiros, no problem. Rabbi Yochanan, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar, we saw this on Daf Chaf, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar, the Amar Tavaru, they both say, Kanu di'uch, kochan shamachitzes, that over here you see just how strong these walls are, that even if Reshus harabim passes through them according to the Chachamim, they still remain a Reshus hayachid. Kanu svirle. Question mark? Right, the question, so the Gemara asks, wait, so Rabbi Yochanan just said that we see over here that according to the Chachamim, these walls of the Pas Beiros are so strong that even though the Reshus harabim passes through, they still remain a Reshus hayachid. Okay? But, however, we seem to see that according to Rabbi Yochanan, he disagrees with this. He would say that if Reshus harabim passes through, it would actually make it Reshus harabim. It would be a problem, right? Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yochanan, Yerushalayim, that when it comes to the city of Jerusalem, if not for the fact that it has gates that get closed at night, well, then it would be considered Reshus harabim, you'd be chayav for carrying there on Shabbos. So we see that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you have an area that a Reshus harabim passes through, well, that would make it a Reshus harabim. So even though he's saying that we see according to the Chachamim how strong these walls of the Pas Beiros are, that even though Reshus harabim passes through, it still remains a Reshus hayachid. Nonetheless, apparently he wouldn't hold that way, because it says that the only reason why you can carry in Jerusalem is because there are doors that they can close at night. But if not, the fact that a street, a road kind of goes through it, would create an issue. So we see that, okay, even though he's explaining the opinion of the rabbis, he doesn't actually hold like the opinion of the rabbis, and he would say that if Reshus harabim passes through this Reshus hayachid, it would be a problem. Virami d'Rab Yehuda, Virami d'Rabbanan, the Gemara says, look, we have a problem, because we could bring a kasha from another context in which Rabbi Yehuda seems to be saying the exact opposite, and the Chachamim seem to be saying the exact opposite. What does this mean? The Tanya, as we learn in a Brisa, Yasser al Kenam Rabbi Yehuda, we've seen this Brisa so many times, Mishahayu lo shnei batim, mishnei tzidei Reshus harabim, that somebody who has a house, we've seen it like a few times in Shabbos, we've seen it like Masechta Shabbos, we've seen it a few times already now in Masechta Ayruvin, somebody who has, owns houses on either side of Reshus harabim, oselechi mikan, velechi mikan, okora mikan, v'nosin be'emtza. Rabbi Yehuda says, all you have to do is just put a lechi on both sides of the, where the road enters in and leaves this area. So you just take a lechi and put it at the entrance on one house, and then by the exit at that same house on the other end. Or a korah from one house to the other on both ends. So you can then carry in the middle, you've made a Reshus hayachid. You have a Reshus hayachid. Amrulo in Ma'avim Reshus harabim b'chach, and the Rabbanan say, no, you can't make an Eruv in Reshus harabim like this. Kash Rabbi Yehuda, Kash Rabbanan. So this is Rabbi Yehuda is contradicting himself, and the Rabbanan are contradicting himself. Meaning, in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that you can't have the Reshus harabim passing through the Pas Beiros. That would be a problem. Yet, he seems to be saying in this other Mishnah, oh yeah, there's a highway going through like this area that you have a house on either side, no problem. So Reshus hayachid, just make sure to put up lechis or koras. So Reshus hayachid, right? So I don't understand. How come over here by Pas Beiros, he's saying that you have to divert the Reshus harabim, yet he has no problem with the highway going through this area between his two houses. And the Rabbanan, in this case, they're saying it's no problem if the Reshus harabim passes through the Pas Beiros, yet they're responding to Rabbi Yehuda in that other case and saying you can't make an Eruv in Reshus harabim by putting up a lechi on either side of this area where the highway passes between the houses. So the Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha. So the Gemara says no, it's no question. So the Gemara says no, it's different. The case where you have the two houses, one on either side of Reshus harabim, well, one on either side of this highway, which is a Reshus harabim, so then you have two real walls, mamish walls of your house. Those are real walls, and therefore that's going to make it a Reshus hayachid. Over here we're talking about like interesting kind of walls that you have that you have L's in the four corners, but they're not, it's basically mostly space. So here, if Reshus harabim passes through, it's going to be a problem. But when you have a house on either side of Reshus harabim, and it's like real walls, then that'll be Reshus hayachid, just put up some lechis. D'Rabbanan nami lo kasha. Hacha ika shem arba mechitzes hasam leka shem arba mechitzes. Very interesting. There's this concept of shem daled mechitzes, right? It has sort of the name of four walls, meaning when it comes to the Pasei Beiros, sure, there might be mostly space, but there's the delineation of four walls, right? Each wall has an amma at either end of it, and then the middle is space, but you could see the demarcation of four walls. Whereas when you just have two walls of your house and a highway passing right between, where you don't have shem daled mechitzes, you just have two walls on either side of a highway, that will be a problem. But by Pasei Beiros, where we have shem daled mechitzes, so then even though the Reshus harabim passes through, it would still be enough to consider Reshus hayachid, and you can draw water from the well, no problem. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, Eretz Yisrael, in Chayavan Aleh Reshus harabim. The entire Eretz Yisrael is Reshus hayachid midoraisa, according to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. All of Eretz Yisrael, ein Chayavan Aleh Mishum Reshus harabim. You are not going to be chayav a korban chatas for carrying a Reshus harabim. Very interesting, right? Yosef Rav Dimi v'ka'amar la Ashmaita. So Rav Dimi was sitting and he was saying this teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, that all of Eretz Yisrael, you're not chayav for Reshus harabim. Amalei Abaye le Rav Dimi, my time. So Abaye said to Rav Dimi, he says, how come? How come in the entire Eretz Yisrael you're not chayav for Reshus harabim? Inei mishum demakif la suma detzur me'ach gisa. If you're going to make the argument, well, because in the north of Eretz Yisrael, there's this steep mountain range, and in the south of Eretz Yisrael, there's some kind of valley that's lower than 10 tefachim, so the mountains are higher than 10 tefachim, the valley area is lower than 10 tefachim, and therefore, it kind of creates these mechitzes surrounding it, these two mechitzes, so therefore it's not considered Reshus harabim. Bavolnami makif la paras me'ach gisa v'diglas me'ach gisa. But Bavel also, you could say, look, on one side of Bavel you have the Euphrates River, on the other side of Bavel you have the Tigris River, and those should be able to be, they're 10 tefachim deep, 4 by 4 tefachim wide. You should be able to say that those are mechitzas. Say that the entire Bavel is surrounded by walls as well, or at least two walls. And if you say 2 walls is enough, so then say that midoraisa, it's not a Reshus harabim. And you should be able to carry in all of Bavel, at least midoraisa on Shabbos. And then the Gemara says, why stop there? The entire world, all the land in the entire world is surrounded by oceans. So maybe there shouldn't be any Reshus harabims in the entire world. Very interesting, right? Dilma Milos Umordos Kamart. So then Abaye suggests maybe what you're talking about is not all of Eretz Yisrael is Reshus harabim. Maybe what it is not a Reshus harabim. Maybe what it means is just that, like, the steep ranges that have like steep mountains and inclines and declines, because those are inconvenient and difficult to walk over there, they are not considered Reshus harabim because there isn't enough foot traffic. Maybe that is what Rabbi Yochanan was talking about, that the ma'alot and mordot, the inclines and declines in Eretz Yisrael, where it's not convenient to walk, those would not be considered Reshus harabim. And listen to what Rav Dimi responds to Abaye. Omar lai, Rav Dimi says, Kar kafna chazise l'reishech be'amude ki Amar Rabbi Yochanan la ashmaita. Rav Dimi says, Abaye, you genius. I knew I saw you hiding among the pillars of the Beis Medrash when Rabbi Yochanan was teaching the sugya. I.e., obviously Abaye wasn't there, but he was saying, Abaye, you are 1000% correct. You must have been there when Rabbi Yochanan taught this, because that's exactly what he was saying. That, right, it's not that all of Eretz Yisrael is considered a Reshus hayachid midoraisa. Rather, he's saying, right, in the areas where it's very difficult to traverse, so those would not be considered Reshus harabim. However, just Reshus, Eretz Yisrael in general, certainly you can have areas that qualify as a Reshus harabim. Itmar Nami was also stated, Ki asa Ravin, Am Rabbi Yochanan, Va'amila, Am Rabbi Abau, Am Rabbi Yochanan, Milos Umordos Sheberetz Yisrael, these steep inclines and declines in Eretz Yisrael, in Chayav Aleh Mishum Reshus harabim, Lefi she'enan kidiglei midbar, you will not be chayav for them as a Reshus harabim, since they are not like the flags in the desert. The flags in the desert were in an open area that was convenient to walk, and was flat, as Rashi points out, that you had the, the Aron would like flatten, Osha Anan Mashva Osa, that the Anan, the cloud, would flatten out all the mountains and everything for them, so it was flat. So therefore, steep inclines and declines would not be like the flags of the encampments in the Midbar, and therefore they would not be Reshus harabim. Ba mine Rachba me Rava. So Rachba asked the following question from Rava: Tela mislakit asar mitoch arba. Okay, this is a sugya that's come up a few times recently. If you have a mound, and the mound rises to a height of 10 tfachim over a slope of 4 amos. Okay, so essentially what you have is an area that's 10 tfachim tall, and the assumption is that it's also 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. So it's a Reshus hayachid. Right now, however, it only rises to a height of 10 tfachim gradually. So we say that as long as it rises to this height of 10 tfachim over a slope of 4 amos or less, over an incline, over a course of 4 amos or less. So, and there's dalet al dalet, I guess, probably by the top. So then, it's a Reshus hayachid. Okay? Fine. So, virabim boken bo. Now, what's interesting about this mound is that lots of people walk on this mound. So chayav alav mishum Reshus harabim or ein chayav alav. So the question is, do we still consider this a Reshus hayachid, or maybe we'll consider Reshus harabim? The nafkamina is, if you carry on these 4 amos, if you carry dalet amos on this mound, would you be chayav? So on the one hand, we say it's a Reshus hayachid because it's 10 tfachim tall, 4 by 4 tfachim wide. So it's a Reshus hayachid, so you can carry there. But on the other hand, lots of people are walking around over there. Maybe it's mevato the Reshus hayachid. Now it's a Reshus harabim, and you'll be chayiv if you carry darim. What do you guys think? Okay, so certainly according to the Rabbanan, there's no question. Meaning, what do they say by pasei beiros? You can have Reshus harabim passing through, and it's no problem. If when it comes to pasei beiros, where it's very easy and convenient to walk there, it's flat land. If anything, right, there's even water over there. It's an attraction. Lots of people passing through, and yet they say the fact that Reshus harabim is passing through is not going to be mevatel the pasei beiros. It's still a good Reshus hayachid. So then, certainly over here, where you have to actually climb onto this mound, certainly they're going to say that it remains a Reshus hayachid because it's in this case it's even less convenient to go to this Reshus hayachid. So certainly it's going to be a Reshus hayachid, and you're not going to be chayiv if you carry. Certainly over here by this mound where it's not convenient to walk there, so then it will remain a Reshus hayachid. Ki tibayilach. However, I believe that this is Rachba continuing and saying, but really what the question is a liba de Rabbi Yehuda. What would Rabbi Yehuda say in this case? My. Hasamu de nichat hashmishte, aval hachad lo nichat hashmishte lo asu rab muvat lemechitzta. So maybe according to Rabbi Yehuda, we can argue that maybe Rabbi Yehuda's opinion would be that when it comes to pasei beiros, which is very convenient for people to walk there, so it would be a problem if Reshus harabim passes through. Therefore, he says divert the Reshus harabim. However, maybe over here by this mound, which is a Reshus hayachid, but lots of people could pass through, but it's inconvenient to pass through. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda will say that it remains a Reshus hayachid. Or maybe it makes no difference, and just like by the pasei beiros, the rabim will mess it up. So here also the rabim will mess it up. Amrle chayavin. Rava says, yeah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to be chayav, i.e., it's a Reshus harabim. Just like by the pasei beiros, the Reshus harabim passing through is a problem and messes up the Reshus hayachid. So here also by this mound, you're going to be chayiv. It's going to be Reshus harabim. Vafilu odin lo bechevel. What if you have to? Says Rachba. What he asks Rava. What if you have to climb onto this mound with a rope? That's like really inconvenient. Amrle in. He says, yeah, it makes no difference. It's still going to be a Reshus harabim since the public can get there. Vafilu b'mailos beis maron. What about these steps of beis maron, which were very steep, and you had to climb them one at a time? I.e., it's certainly not convenient for people to get up there. Rava says, yeah, makes no difference. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the fact that it's in a public area and the public has access to it will mess up this Reshus hayachid status. Eisvei, Rachba then asks a kasha against Rava. Chatzor sharabim nichnasin la bazo, v'yosin bazo, Reshus harabim l'tuma, Reshus hayachid l'Shabbos. If you have a chatzor, now we saw this in Daf Ches Amud Aleph at the bottom. So if you have a chatzor, you have a courtyard. Now what's interesting about this courtyard is that you can actually enter into the courtyard on one side and leave and exit the courtyard on the other side. So, and you have the public, and they use this courtyard as like a shortcut, right? They come in on one side and exit on the other side. So we say it's a Reshus harabim l'tuma, Reshus hayachid l'Shabbos. That l'gabi tuma we treat it as a Reshus harabim in terms of, Safek tuma Reshus harabim is potter. So in terms of tuma, we treat it as a Reshus harabim. But in terms of Shabbos, it's a Reshus hayachid. Okay, fine. So what do we see? So we have Reshus hayachid, that the Rabbim uses it and passes through, and we're saying that it remains a Reshus hayachid. Fine. Money. Now, whose opinion is this, that it remains a Reshus hayachid? Ilim Rabbanan. Well, if we're going to say it's the Rabbanan, well, sure, that makes sense, yeah. Hashta u'ma'asam tenicha tashmishte amir Rabbanan lo asu Rabbim vatlim mechitzta acha delonicha tashmishte lo koshikin. The thing is, according to Rabbanan, it's a little bit too obvious. According to the Rabbanan, even by Pasei Beiros, where it's super convenient to walk through the Pasei Beiros, they still say that the people walking through it are not mevatel the Reshus hayachid. Well, then certainly in this case of the Chatzor, where it's mostly closed and there's just two doors kind of opening into it, and it's not as easy to get in. Certainly, the Rabbanan are going to say that it remains a Reshus hayachid. There's no question there, so they wouldn't even have to say that over here that it remains a Reshus hayachid. So Elav, Rabbi Yehuda. So rather, says Rachba, you must have to conclude that this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And what he's saying is that by a Pasei Beiros, since it's super convenient to walk through there, that is why the Rabbim will be Mavatal, the Mechitza, and it will no longer be Reshus hayachid. However, by this Chatzor, that it's difficult to get in, so apparently Rabbi Yehuda is saying that it remains a Reshus hayachid even though the Rabbim can get in. So the Gemara says, Lo, Olam Rabbanan, Reshus harabim l'tuma, it's tuichalei. So the Gemara answers, no. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that even if it's difficult and inconvenient to get into this Reshus hayachid, it would still be considered a Reshus harabim since the Rabbim can get in. So then what's pshat? Then how come the Chachamim what's the Chiddush over here? Obviously the Chachamim would say that this is a Reshus hayachid. They even say that a Pasei Beiros is a Reshus hayachid if the Rabbim passes through. So the Chiddush is not to teach that it's a Reshus hayachid on Shabbos. That's obvious. We know that from the Pasei Beiros. The Chiddush according to the Rabbanan is that in terms of Tuma, it would be considered Reshus harabim. That is the Chiddush that the Rabbanan want to teach. But in terms of Shabbos, there's no Chidushim over here. The Rabbanan would say it's a Reshus hayachid even if the Rabbim passed through it. Rabbi Yehuda would say that since the Rabbim passed through it, it's not a Reshus hayachid. Okay, the Gemara asks two more questions against Rava, right? Rava who maintains that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you have Rabbim passing through a Reshus hayachid, then it will be mevatel the Reshus hayachid, no matter how inconvenient it is for these people to pass through. So says the Gemara, Tashma mevos ha-mefulashos bebaros b'shichon u'v'maros, that if you have a mavui ha-mefulash, a mavui that's open on both ends, inside of a pit or inside of a ditch or inside of a cave. You're going to have to understand what that means. So Reshus hayachid the Shabbos, Reshus harabim the Tumah, it's considered Reshus hayachid in terms of Shabbos and Reshus harabim in terms of Tumah. Now, bebaros salka daitech, one second, do you really think that it means that we're talking about a mavui inside of a pit? Like, the whole point is that a mavui goes from Reshus harabim to Reshus harabim, that it opens up on both sides of Reshus harabim. How can that be if you're like inside of a pit? So ela livoros Reshus hayachid, ela livoros. No, so rather what it means is that it opens up into a pit, which means you have a mavui and a mefulash, but on one end of it is a big pit that you can fall in. So, in that case, we're saying what? Reshus hayachid l'Shabbos v'Reshus harabim l'Tumah. It's Reshus hayachid for Shabbos, and it's Reshus harabim in terms of Tumah. And what's interesting about this pit being at the end is that because it's like 10 tfachim deep, So, and like 4x4 tefachim wide, so it kilu creates like walls and stuff, and therefore it's not considered a mafulish anymore. Fine, so it's considered Reshus hayachid, and we're saying that even though the rabim can pass through over there, nonetheless it remains a Reshus hayachid. Okay? We're saying Reshus hayachid, the Shabbos, Reshus harabim, the Tumah. Money, now who's the author of this Mishnah? Ilema Rabbanan, if it's the Rabbanan, and they're saying that in this mavui with the pit, so it's Reshus hayachid. So hashto ma'asam denicha tashmishtei amrei lo asirabim muvadlela. Well, by the pasiberos, where it's convenient to pass through, they say that it nonetheless remains a Reshus hayachid. Hachad lo nicha tashmishtei lo kol shekain. Then over here, where it's inconvenient to pass through this mavui that has a pit at the end of it, so certainly it's going to remain a Reshus hayachid. Elav Rabbi Yehuda, rather it must be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And he's saying that because it's inconvenient to pass through this mavui with the pit, that is why it's a Reshus hayachid. And we see it's a kasha and rava that when you have a Reshus hayachid that is inconvenient for the rabbin to pass through, it remains a Reshus hayachid. Lo l'olam rabbanon. No, really, it's the rabbi's opinion. Well, why do I need to teach this according to the rabbis? Obviously, it's a Reshus hayachid. So Reshus harabim l'tumah it's tzrichalei. But once again, the chiddush is just that not about the fact that it's a Reshus hayachid. We know according to the rabbis it would be a Reshus hayachid even if lots of people can pass through. The chiddush was that it's a Reshus harabim for tumah. Fine. Tashma kamanir shvile beis Gilgal. When it comes to these paths of beis Gilgal, which was like these very steep mountains, v'chayotze bayan, and similar to them, Reshus hayachid the Shabbos, Reshus harabim the tumah. They were Reshus hayachid in terms of Shabbos, but not for Tumah. Bezu shvile beis Gilgal. What are these shvile beis Gilgal? Amr dvei Rabbi Yanai. Kol she'ena over ha'eved yachol litol sa'a shel chitin v'yaretz lifnei sardiot. Right? It's these what's defining about the shvile Gilgal is that a slave would be unable to take a sa'a of wheat and run in front of a officer over there, meaning that it's difficult to maneuver over there and to walk over there. So we're saying that it's inconvenient to walk there and it's considered a Reshus hayachid for Shabbos. So Mani, who's the author of this Mishnah or Brisa, Ilema Rabbanan, if we say it's the rabbis, Hashto mahasam denicha tashmishta amir Rabbanan lo asirabim vatlei la mechitzdacha lo nicha tashmishta lo kol shekain. If by the pasiberos, where it's convenient to walk through, they say that it remains a Reshus hayachid. Certainly over here, where it's inconvenient to walk, they will maintain that it's a Reshus hayachid. Rabbi Yehuda, rather it must be teaching that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it's inconvenient to walk somewhere, then it can continue to be Reshus hayachid. Amar lei. So Rava said, Shvili beis Gilgal ka'amart. Are you asking me about from the Shvili beis Gilgal, from these steep paths? Yoshua oiv Yisrael haya. Yoshua, Moshe's successor, was a big lover of Israel. Amar v'tikin loim drachim v'sratya, and he went and constructed for them roads and highways. Any place that was convenient to walk, so he gave it into the possession of the public. But if it was inconvenient to walk over there, he gave it over to individuals. And therefore, these shvile beis Gilgal were very inconvenient to walk there, and therefore he gave it over to the individuals, and therefore they can kind of control who comes in and who comes out, and that's why it maintains a Reshus hayachid status, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. But in general, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the rabbin would pass the Reshus hayachid, it would lose its Reshus hayachid status. That was the Avchav Beis of Masechta Ayruvin. Let us do a review. So at the beginning, we had some Agadata about Torah and Tzadikim and Rishayim. Very interesting stuff. And then we talked about the maximum size for Pasei Beiraos, right? We know, of course, according to the Chacham, the Pasei Beiraos can be any size. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's a maximum of Beis Sa'asayim, 2 Beis Sa'ah. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, those 2 Beis Sa'ah are just of the well itself. They can be 2 Sa'ah, and they don't have to be square, right? It could be like 100 amos on one side, and 50 amos on the other side. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that also 2 Beis Sa'ah, however, it would have to be square, right? So it would be like 70 and 2/3 amos on each side of this, of the size of the pit itself, of the bore. Now, we got into the sugya of a Reshus hayachid that has a Reshus harabim passing through it. And we saw the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham. Basically, I think you could break down the machlokas in the following way. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he says, look, as long as there are two real walls, then it's a Reshus hayachid. However, if there aren't two real walls, well, then it's going to be considered a Reshus harabim. And that is why, since there aren't two real walls, if the rabim passes through, so then it's not going to be Reshus hayachid anymore. Whereas, when he says that you have two homes, one on either side is a side of Reshus hayachid, of Reshus harabim, just put up two lechis and then you can walk there. Because there's two, you could, carry them because there's two real walls. The Chacham say, you don't need two real walls, but you do need Shem Daled Mechitzos. You need the name of like four walls, right? And as long as, such as by Pasei Beiros, you have the outlines of four walls, then that would be enough, right? You have one amma on each end of the wall, that's enough. And even if the Reshus harabim passes through, it will remain a Reshus hayachid. However, if you do not have Shem Daled Mechitzos, well, then it would be considered a Reshus harabim, as we see by the houses on either side of the highway, that he said to Rabbi Yehuda that you can't make an Ayruvin Reshus harabim like this. Cheved, that was Daf Chav Beis. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you have a great day. Peace out.